In this video, I'm gonna walk you through how I make sourdough star bread, and this one's gonna have a sweet and spicy filling. Come with me and I will show you the steps. The first thing that we need to do is we're going to prepare the starter. So the night before, I'm gonna mix up my starter of 100 grams of water and 100 grams all-purpose flour with about a tablespoon of my healthy sourdough starter. Mix this together, cover it. It's gonna sit overnight to become active. In the morning, my starter is beautiful, active, super bubbly. I made an extra big batch, as you can see. We're not using all of this in this bread, just so you know. Before I start to use my starter, I'm gonna set that aside. It's time to get my ingredients out. And the first step I like to do is scald the milk. Scalding the milk is when we take the milk, we're gonna actually add more than the recipe needs because some of it will evaporate during this heating process. This neutralizes the proteins in the milk, so there's no competition during the fermentation, and the fermentation will happen at the right rate and have the best overall look and timing that we want in our sourdough bread. This heats until we start to see some steam coming off it. You'll see some of the proteins start to cook on the bottom. You do not want your milk to foam, so make sure you catch it and you're watching it before it gets to that step. I'm gonna put that in the bowl. I'm gonna put a food thermometer in there. This milk is really hot. We want it to cool down before we add our other ingredients, particularly our flour. We don't want to cook flour in this, and we don't want to cook our starters. So let your milk cool down until it's 100 to 115 degrees at the max. While this is cooling, it's time to prepare our other ingredients. You're gonna separate your egg. We just need the egg yolk for this one. Pre-measure your bread flour, your salt, your sugar, so those are ready to go. And also you should have your butter sitting out and at room temperature. So that's on the side sitting out because that's our last step of preparing our dough. Once the milk is cooled down, as you can see, it is time to we're going to add the sugar in, we're gonna add the flour and salt mixture, and we're gonna add our starter. Once these ingredients are in there, I'm gonna give it a mix for about 1 to 2 minutes until it becomes a shaggy dough. I don't want it fully incorporated before I add the egg yolk. I do this because if I never want to have any cooked egg in my dough, and so this allows the ingredients to distribute the temperature evenly to make sure there's no hot spots in the dough before I add the egg yolk. So now is the time we add the egg yolk, mix that in, keep mixing it so that egg yolk gets mixed in, adds great richness and texture and protein to our dough. And then this is going to continue mixing so that all those ingredients incorporate, and we want our dough to pull away from the edge of the bowl and become really soft and strong. Once the sides of our bowl are becoming clean because the dough is pulling away, whether you are using a stand mixer or you're kneading by hand, it's not sticking to your hands as much. This is the time when we want to add our softened butter. And I'm using a scale here so I can just cut it off and look at how much I'm using. I'm looking for 28 grams of softened butter. I'm adding it about a tablespoon at a time from my scale. So now that the butter's in, this dough will continue mixing, continue being kneaded by the machine, or if you're using your hands, you're kneading it by hand until this butter is completely incorporated. You're gonna have to use a dough scraper or a spatula to scrape the sides of the bowl. So after the butter gets fully mixed in, you're gonna let this mix and knead a little bit longer until your dough is really soft and smooth. When you push into it, it should spring back like you see here. And once you're at that stage, it's time to make sure it's covered in an airtight container, cover the bowl with saran wrap, and let this do its bulk ferment for 4 to 7 hours. So at the beginning of the bulk fermentation, you can see that our dough is pretty small. When I put it in this Cambro here, you can see it's not even reaching the 1 quart or 1 liter measuring line. It's still in a very tight ball. So as it ferments during the day, it's gonna double in volume, and you'll see it rise up and spread out to just above that line. So whatever container you're using, look for it to double. You're also gonna look to press on it, and if it leaves indentation, then it shows that there's enough air built up and there enough fermentation has taken place for you to do the shaping process. For the filling, one of the first things you wanna do is create your chai spice mix. So I'm making mine with cinnamon and ginger, clove, cardamom, and 1 little pinch of black pepper. This smells really nice and spicy. You can adjust a little bit to your preferences if you'd like. And then we are gonna set this aside while we mix up the softened stick of butter and 60 grams of white sugar. So we're gonna mix that up, and once that's all mixed together with our paddle mixer, or you can use a spatula, you can add in your chai spice mixture. Once your filling is completely combined, we're going to bring that to our shaping area and prepare our dough. For this, the dough we're going to divide in fourths. You can either do this by eyeball or you can use a scale to really make sure that you're precise. That's a good way to make sure that they're all equal and going to spread out. I like to make sure they're tightened into a ball and set aside before I begin my shaping. Get a piece of parchment on the side, and then you're going to use a very light amount of flour. I don't like to use a lot of flour because it will change the texture of my dough. Your dough, if it's fully fermented, then it should not be sticking to the surface, so a very light coating of flour should be sufficient to make sure it doesn't stick while you're rolling it out. I like to put a little bit on the rolling pin as well. And if you're having trouble with fermentation, I have a post about how to tell when your dough is fully fermented. You can check that out in the description box. So take your first section of dough, you're gonna roll this out thin into a circle shape. Now don't worry about these being perfect because in the shaping later, it covers over a lot of our imperfections. So roll it out into a circle shape that's about 11 to 12 inches wide. And then once that's rolled out, a little tip is trying to get those edges around the side rolled out so they're not too thick. Then put that first layer on your parchment paper. Now it's time to fill the first layer. Put your bowl on the scale, tear the scale so it says 0, and then you're going to take out about 50 grams of your filling and spread it over your circle. Keep about a ½ inch to an inch of the outside of the circle uncovered. Now it's time to shape the other sections of dough. So we're going to roll out each one in the same way, and we're going to put these layers on one by one. The second layer, again, is going to have about that 50 grams of filling on it. The third layer is going to have another 50 grams of filling. And for our final layer, the fourth piece of dough that goes on top, we're going to take what's left. It's not going to be a full amount that we used before. It's just a little bit of the filling left. We're going to spread that thinly on the very top of the dough. This is a little bit differently than some of my other star breads, but I love the way it looks in the finished product. Once you have all your filling used up and all your layers are stacked, it is time to the next step. So take a small circle cutter, like a small biscuit cutter, like the one you see here. And then you're going to take a sharp knife, like a butcher knife, and we're going to divide around the dough from that biscuit cutter out into 16 slices. So what I like to do is do it in fourths first. So almost like a compass, north, east, south, and west. Make those cuts so now it's in fourths. And now I'm going to divide each of those fourths into fourths again to make 16ths around the side. You didn't know you were going to do math today, but here we go. So cut along the center of the fourth and then cut that each half of the fourth again to create these beautiful 16ths. And you see they're not all exactly perfect, so we're just trying to get it. The goal is to make sure we don't cut through the dough and cut it off. So you just want to keep it intact to the center and keep them connected. Once all your cuts are made, take two pieces, twist them outwards 2 to 3 times. You just don't want them to be too twisted that all the fillings fall out or they get too thin, and then press the ends together into a point. And so you're going to keep doing that around your dough. Once you've twisted them all, there's a beautiful star here. It is unproofed, so we are going to take off the biscuit cutter, put plastic wrap over the top, and it is time to let it proof for 1.5 to up to 4 hours. For breakfast, I'm going to let it proof for its full allotment of time until I see it's puffy and risen. You can see this before and after, how it was pretty thin. It was like all the angles were really sharp, but the dough, after it's proofed, looks really puffy around the edges, especially at the points. So I'm going to take this covered star bread and I'm going to put it in the fridge where it's going to rest overnight. And then in the morning, after it's been sitting in there, it's resting, it's not going to overproof in there. It's really nice to have the fridge as an option so that we can pause the process. So in the morning, I take my bread out. I'm going to let it sit and rest at room temperature for 60 minutes for it to come back to room temperature, let all the fillings, and let the dough soften. A good indication that it's soften and at a good room temperature is when you touch the dough, it should give a little bit. It's time to preheat the oven to 365 degrees. Once your oven is at temperature, then we're going to bake our star bread for 30 to 35 minutes until it's completely golden brown. One tip is if you're having trouble browning your star bread, at the end, especially if it's been in the fridge, sometimes getting that good golden brown evenly on your bread can be a challenge. Turn on your convection bake for the last 1 to 3 minutes to make sure it gets evenly golden brown across the top. Once your bread is baked, take it out of your oven to cool. This is an optional step. You don't have to do this. Sometimes I think this bread is beautiful as is, or even with a subtle dusting of powdered sugar. For this bake, my kids really want to see it covered in some zigzag icing. So I made a simple vanilla icing with powdered sugar, a little vanilla, and some milk. I add the milk really slowly to make sure that it has the right consistency. I want it to be drizzling consistency so I can zigzag it across the bread. And after my bread has cooled for 10 to 15 minutes so that it's cool enough to handle, I put it on my serving platter, and then I take my whisk and I slowly just do zigzags across the top with my topping. And once your bread is topped, it's time to cut it in slices and serve. All right, so there you have it. There's the star bread. This one is delicious. There's so many ways you can customize it. The full recipe is in the description box below. I hope that you enjoy making it. If you do, I would love to hear about it. And if this video was helpful, please give it a like, share it with a friend, and subscribe to this page. Thank you for being here, and I hope that you continue to find ways to connect with people that you love through bread. Bye for now.